For 22 years, I had lived without a father. My mother died giving birth to me, and weeks later, my father abandoned me on my grandparents' doorstep. He left without a word, disappearing from my life entirely. I had learned to live with that void until the day he unexpectedly appeared at my door. I opened the door and there he was, his face unfamiliar yet unmistakable. But what he did next broke me. I stood frozen as he greeted me, his face full of an odd mix of regret and determination. My grandmother used to tell me stories about my birth. The tears in her eyes when she talked about that day haunted me. She said my father was inconsolable. He shut himself away, leaving them to care for me during those first few fragile weeks. Even as an infant, I sensed the void where he should have been. In those early days, it was my grandparents who truly stepped up. My grandmother said they bathed, fed, and sang me to sleep, while my father remained locked in his grief. They took turns holding me, promising that I'd never feel alone. "Your dad, he was a mess," she recalled. "We had 2 babies to care for, in a sense." For 2 relentless weeks, they shielded me from the harsh reality of my father's absence. Then, after those 2 agonizing weeks, my father seemed to man up. He walked into the room one morning, holding me with a look that mixed fear and newfound resolve. "Every journey begins with a single step," my grandmother would say. For a week, it seemed like he was grasping his responsibility. He did the late-night feeds and even read me stories. It was as if he was trying to turn over a new leaf. Things seemed fine for that week. But then, one morning, my grandpa woke up to find 27 missed calls from my dad. Panic welled up inside him. He shook my grandma awake, worry etched into his face. They tried calling back, only to hear the voicemail. With adrenaline pumping, they got dressed hastily, the phone clutched tightly in his hand. Thoughts raced through their minds, but mostly fear. Fear of what had happened after those calls. They sped over to my father's home, their hearts pounding against their chests. My grandpa's hands trembled as he unlocked the door, swinging it open. There on the doorstep, they found me bundled in a baby basket, wrapped in a delicate blanket. A note lay on top. "I'm sorry." That was it. The last trace of my father before he vanished. Tears welled up in their eyes, both heartbreaking and infuriating, as they held me close. From then on, my grandparents became my world. They never spoke of my father unless necessary, and I learned to bury the questions deep inside. Birthdays came and went, marked by love but tinged with the absence of a father's embrace. School plays, graduations, events where his presence could have meant the world, passed by without him. Yet today, as I stared at the man who deserted me, those dormant questions rushed back with full force. I demanded answers, my tone sharp with years of pent-up anger. Patrick, my father, winced but complied, his voice trembling. He spoke of knowing my mom, their whirlwind romance that felt like a dream, and the struggles they faced together. Each word chipped away at the wall of hatred I had built. But nothing could prepare me for the details of my mother's death, and how it shattered his core, making him feel utterly incapable. He detailed the devastating impact her death had on him. He was a broken man, frozen in grief, incapable of raising me properly. Raised eyebrows and skeptical looks filled the room, but Patrick kept talking. His voice cracked as he described nights when he wished he could hear her laugh once more or hold her hand. To him, abandoning me wasn't just an act of cowardice. It was a desperate attempt to preserve my safety. Patrick claimed he thought leaving me with my grandparents was the best decision. He painted a picture of himself as a wreck, believing I deserved better than a father who couldn't even take care of himself. His words filled me with conflicting emotions. How could leaving an innocent baby on a doorstep be the best decision? Yet, as much as I hated to admit it, their love had indeed filled the void he left. Nothing he said could erase the agony of abandonment, but his story does add a layer of understanding to the pain. Each word slowly chipped away at the anger I had harbored for so long. It became clearer why he did what he did, even if it didn't make it right. For the first time, I saw him as a human being, flawed and broken. However, his next request caught me completely off guard. He wanted to take me somewhere important. I couldn't fathom what more he needed to show me, but the earnestness in his eyes made me curious.
"It's a place you should see," he said softly, his eyes pleading.
My anger simmered, but curiosity started to take its place. What could be so crucial after all these years? Reluctantly, I agreed to go with him. How could I not? My curiosity was piqued despite my lingering resentment. Shoulders tense, I nodded. "Fine, let's go," I said, trying to mask my suspicion. He managed a weak smile and led the way to his car. As we drove, I kept a wary eye on him, unsure of what awaited us. Only one thing was certain: this better be worth it. He drove us to an old park, the same one my grandparents had taken me to as a child. Memories of carefree days spent on the swings and feeding ducks flooded back. I glanced at Patrick, wondering why he brought me here of all places. His eyes scanned the area as if searching for something lost. What could possibly be so vital about this old, familiar park? Patrick pointed to a bench near a large oak tree, a spot I hadn't particularly noticed before. "That bench," he said, voice trembling, "is where your mom and I used to sit, lost in each other's company." I followed his gaze, trying to imagine them there, young and in love. It was surreal, seeing this tangible piece of their history. It made their relationship feel more real to me. Here, he whispered, was where he had realized he was in love with her. His eyes filled with vulnerability as he spoke about that moment. "Your mom was everything to me," he said, almost to himself. I stood there, taking in the gravity of his words. This bench became a symbol of something profound, a love that once was, but had been shattered. It was hard not to feel some empathy. I saw vulnerability in his eyes. This recollection was painful yet precious to him. It was as if he was reliving a memory that defined his life. It was here I knew I could never love anyone else, he murmured, eyes glistening. Seeing this side of him so raw was disarming. Part of me wanted to reach out, but the barriers built over 22 years held me back. The emotions were overwhelming. He handed me a faded photograph of them on that very bench, looking blissfully happy. The image was worn, but the love was evident. My heart clenched as I looked at their smiling faces, forever frozen in that perfect moment. "This is how I want to remember us," he said, tears pooling in his eyes. The photo was a bridge between the past and present, and holding it felt surreal. Back at my house, Patrick asked for forgiveness, pushing a pile of old letters across the table. They looked aged, yellowed by time, yet carefully preserved. "These are for you," he said, his voice cracking. I stared at the letters, a flood of emotions surging through me. They were his woman words, unsent and unread, a direct line from him to me. What could these letters possibly hold after all this time? The letters were all penned to me, but never sent. Each one contained words of love, regret, and hopes for a connection that never happened. As I read through them, tears welled up. "I wanted you to know how much I care," Patrick said softly. The letters painted a different picture than the one I had known. A man who regretted his actions deeply, but was too broken to fix them. The letters before me were filled with love, apologies, and hopes for a future together that never came. They were dated through the years, marking missed birthdays and milestones. Patrick had poured his heart into each one, expressing the emotions he couldn't convey in person. these were meant for you. Always, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I hesitated before picking one up, my hands trembling slightly. As I started reading, tears welled up in my eyes. The words on the pages unveiled a man deeply regretful of his actions. He spoke of sleepless nights, haunted by the memory of leaving me behind. I wished every day that I could turn back time, one letter said. The more I read, the more I saw not just a deserter, but a man broken by his own choices. Each letter painted a vivid picture of his life without me, a life filled with sorrow and missed milestones. He wrote about the first steps he imagined me taking, the birthdays he missed, and the graduations he never attended. Patrick's absence impacted more than just my life. It shaped his own existence into one long string of regret. I was a ghost in your world, he had written, and it was painfully clear. Reading those letters left me feeling conflicted. On the one hand, skepticism held me back, questioning his sincerity. On the other hand, a budding empathy started to form. Could I really trust this man who abandoned me? Yet each word from those pages urged me to see him differently. His pain was tangible, and it filled the room with a heavy, awkward silence. My heart wavered between anger and sympathy. Shocked, I demanded to know how he had been keeping tabs on me all these years. My voice shook with a mix of anger and curiosity. How did you know where I was, what I was doing? I asked, my eyes boring into his. Patrick looked down, avoiding my gaze. It was clear he had anticipated this moment, but was still unprepared for the confrontation. His hesitation spoke volumes. He admitted to hiring private, investigators, and even following me from a distance during significant events. I thought it was the only way I could stay connected without intruding in your life, he said softly, his eyes downcast. I felt a mix of violation and surprise. Patrick's actions were invasive, yet the thought of him being there, unseen, added another layer to the complex web of emotions entangling us. At first, I felt violated. The idea of him spying on me was unsettling. How could you think that was okay? I snapped. Patrick's face fell. It was the only way I could stay connected without disrupting your life, he argued. He believed it was a necessary measure to ensure I was safe and cared for. His explanation didn't sit well with me, but it hinted at an odd form of concern. He reached for a photo album and handed it to me. Here, I want you to see these, he said. As I flipped through the pages, pictures of me at various stages of my life stared back. School plays, graduations, everyday moments, all captured without my knowledge. It was bittersweet evidence of his silent presence. Each photo was a snapshot of a life lived under a hidden, watchful eye. Anger and affection stirred within me as I continued flipping through the pages. It was a strange sensation, feeling both resentment for his absence and a grudging appreciation for his effort to stay connected. Each moment captured was a testament to his silent dedication. Yet, the burning question remained. If he cared this much, why stay away for so long? My emotions churned, struggling to find a balance. I couldn't contain the question any longer. Why now? Why not make contact earlier? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. Patrick's face grew solemn. He seemed to wrestle with the right words before taking a deep breath. There are reasons, important ones, he began, his voice filled with an urgency that piqued my curiosity even more. The tension hung heavy in the air, awaiting his next revelation. Patrick explained that recent health issues prompted this long overdue reunion. His face showed a mix of worry and regret, as he confessed that he could no longer ignore the toll his illness was taking.
I wouldn't have come if it weren't serious for me, he said, his voice trembling.
This revelation cast a new light on the visit, making me wonder about the urgency behind his appearance. He revealed that he had been diagnosed with a chronic illness that forced him to reassess his priorities. Patrick spoke of countless doctor visits and the grueling toll of treatments that had left him drained.
I realized I couldn't waste more time, he explained.
The severity of his condition was evident in his weakened demeanor. It wasn't easy to see the man who had abandoned me now grappling with his own mortality. This revelation brought a lump to my throat. The man before me looked frail, a shadow of abandonment and illness hanging over him. His eyes, once lively, now seemed dulled by pain and regret. Patrick's physical decline mirrored the emotional wreckage he left behind 22 years ago. Seeing him like this stirred a mix of sorrow and confusion in me. How could someone who caused such pain now look so vulnerable? His vulnerability didn't excuse the past, but it humanized him in a way I'd never expected. Here was a man who'd made horrific choices, now laid bare by his own frailties. "I've made so many mistakes," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. There was no denying the wrongs he had committed. Yet seeing him in such a frail condition, it was tough not to feel a twinge of empathy. He wanted to build bridges before it was too late. "I need to make things right," he confessed, eyes pleading. His vulnerability was undeniable, and the enormity of what he sought was clear. It wasn't just about healing his own regrets, but about offering me the answers and closure I deserved. Patrick's desire to make amends rooted deep in his eyes, pushing me to reconsider my stance. His sincerity suddenly seemed palpable, making me want to give him a chance. Even though the wounds still felt fresh, seeing him in such a fragile state brought out an unexpected compassion in me. "Maybe we can try," I found myself saying, surprising even myself with the openness. A small, hopeful glimmer sparkled in Patrick's eyes. For the first time, I considered the possibility of actually mending our relationship. Despite all the revelations, I still needed more time to process everything. "This is a lot to take in," I admitted, trying to wrap my head around the whirlwind of emotions. Patrick nodded, understanding my hesitation.
"Take all the time you need,"
he reassured me, his voice gentle. The sincerity in his eyes held a glimmer of hope, but I wasn't ready to dive into uncharted emotional waters just yet. I invited him to stay in town for a few days, a temporary truce to explore if we could mend our broken relationship. "Let's see how it goes," I offered, trying to keep my tone neutral. Patrick agreed immediately, a small smile forming on his lips. The decision to allow this time together marked the beginning of a cautious journey toward potential healing and understanding. As we spent time together, he showed me more photos, shared stories about my mother, and even some lighthearted moments from his own life. We laughed at the old photographs. His narration was bringing them to life. "Your mom was the light in every room," he reminisced. Each shared memory added pieces to the puzzle of our fragmented history, creating a tapestry of emotions that left me introspective and hopeful. Slowly, the ice between us began to thaw. We found ourselves sharing meals, watching old home videos, and talking about nothing and everything. Patrick's stories, filled with genuine emotion, helped break down my defenses. It wasn't easy, but little by little, the barriers I built for 22 years started to crack. I introduced him to my friends, who eyed him with cautious optimism. Our time together slowly shifted from awkward tension to tentative familiarity. I introduced him to my friends, carefully framing him as someone from my past who was trying to reconcile. They knew nothing about the storm he had caused in my life, so I had to tread lightly. During these introductions, I noticed how Patrick tried to mask his anxiety with polite smiles. Despite the unease, his efforts didn't go unnoticed. My friends were polite but reserved, unsure of what to make of him. They were skeptical but supportive, offering guarded questions and evaluating his responses cautiously. Sarah, my closest friend, pulled me aside. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at me. Patrick's presence had been a thunderstorm in clear skies. Yet there was a strange, quiet hope within me. My friend's tentative acceptance was a fragile step, but a necessary one. One evening, as we sat in my dimly lit kitchen, Patrick revealed a stack of documents. "These are for you," he said, sliding them across the table. My curiosity piqued. I couldn't help but feel wary. As I began to sift through the pages, I noticed they were proof of investments, savings, and insurance policies. He spoke softly. "I've saved for your education and well-being, even if I wasn't there in person." These documents included investments, savings, and insurance policies naming me as the beneficiary. It was a comprehensive financial plan, meticulously detailed and clearly meant for my benefit. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Patrick seemed to have calculated every aspect of my future needs, ensuring that even if he couldn't be there, I would be financially secure. This revelation flipped my perception of him, forcing me to rethink his role in my life. This was another shock, contradicting my image of him as an irresponsible deserter. For years, I had built walls around this idea of a man who abandoned his only child without a second thought. Every crumpled bill and signed paper laid a different foundation. How could someone so seemingly careless have planned so meticulously for my future? I looked at Patrick, confusion evident on my face, and he simply nodded, acknowledging my silent questions. It showed he cared. Albeit in a remote and tortured way, his efforts were like invisible threads trying to stitch together a bond he had. Severed long ago, Patrick seemed to sense my internal struggle and spoke softly. I did what I thought was best, even if it was from a distance. I felt a strange mix of emotions. His actions suggested a care I hadn't recognized, but could I accept it? Holding these papers, I felt a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. On one hand, I was thankful for the foresight and care demonstrated in these documents. On the other, I couldn't understand why he chose to stay away, despite all this planning. The conflicting emotions left me speechless, struggling to reconcile the image of my absentee father with the man who had invested so much into my future. Why go through all this trouble yet remain absent? The question burned inside me, demanding answers. I looked Patrick in the eye, searching for any hint of truth or deception. His face was a mix of regret and hope, clearly exhausted from years of harboring this secret. I needed to know what kept him away all these years. What was the driving force behind his absence, despite his evident care? Conversations grew more relaxed, yet intense questions remained, like a shadow looming over us. We talked about mundane things, the weather, recent events, even laughed at some shared jokes. But the important topics never left my mind. As the days passed, a slight comfort settled between us, but I still needed answers. Each passing hour brought a little more ease, but the big questions hung in the air, unresolved. Over dinner, I finally asked what he expected from me now. The light-hearted conversations had lulled me into a momentary peace, but clarity demanded direct confrontation. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice steady but inquisitive. Patrick seemed taken aback, his fork pausing midair. His eyes darted around, searching for an answer amidst the clatter of plates. The room grew quieter, anticipation thickening the air. Was it forgiveness, reconciliation, or something else that he hoped to achieve? My question hung in the air, heavy and demanding. Patrick took a deep breath, visibly struggling to find the right words. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, anticipating his answer. Meanwhile, dinner lay forgotten on our plates. The room seemed to constrict around us, urging him to speak and shed light on his true intentions. Patrick seemed taken aback, visibly agitated, and unsure of how to answer. He leaned back in his chair, running a shaky hand through his hair. I don't know, he finally stammered, his eyes darting around the room. The uncertainty in his voice was unnerving. It wasn't the response I had expected. His hesitation only added to the confusion swirling in my mind, making me question his motives even more. His silence unnerved me, the room thick with unspoken thoughts and swirling emotions. Patrick's eyes met mine briefly before looking away. The seconds ticked by, each one amplifying the tension. The questions I had buried for years now threatened to spill over in frustration. Silence can sometimes be louder than words, and this silence screamed of unresolved issues and lingering fears. I needed him to break it, to say something, anything. Finally, he admitted needing my help to resolve unfinished business that involved both of us. "I need your help," he said, his voice almost a whisper. The vulnerability in his tone took me by surprise. He looked down, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth. The weight of his request settled over me like a heavy blanket. What kind of unfinished business could possibly require my involvement after all these years? My curiosity spiked once more, making me agree to hear him out. "What kind of unfinished business?" I asked, leaning forward. Patrick sighed, relief evident in his eyes, as he realized I was willing to listen. "It's complicated," he began, but I cut him off. "Just tell me." His gaze softened as he nodded. The emotions in the room were turbulent, but the decision to listen felt right, if daunting. The next day, we visited a lawyer's office upon Patrick's request. The atmosphere was clinical, the stark contrast to our emotional turmoil. I glanced at Patrick as he fumbled with a manila folder, his hands shaking slightly. The lawyer welcomed us into his office, offering a professional smile. As we sat down, I couldn't shake the feeling of apprehension. What could be so important that it required legal intervention? He explained that he had documented the entire ordeal of abandoning me, his sorrowful journey and his attempts to reconnect. The folder was filled with puppers, the tangible evidence of his regret and struggle. Patrick's voice trembled as he recounted the timeline, each document showcasing a chapter of his life lived in shadows and sorrow. This wasn't just about seeking forgiveness, it was about documenting a heartbreaking journey. These documents were part of a legal confession he hoped would protect me. Patrick had detailed every regret, every moment of pain, in an effort to ensure that I wouldn't carry any legal burdens. The lawyer looked at me, his eyes filled with understanding. The weight of my father's story now had a legal binding, meant to shield me from repercussions. It was a significant step, one that rendered me speechless. As the lawyer explained, Patrick's intent was to prevent me from carrying any potential legal or emotional burdens after his passing. His voice was calm yet firm, detailing the implications of each document. Patrick had taken every necessary step to protect me, both legally and emotionally. This realization cracked the defensive shell I had so carefully built over the years, exposing the raw vulnerability I had been hiding. This selfless gesture cracked my defensive shell further. Patrick's actions spoke volumes, making it difficult to maintain the barriers I had erected. The sincerity in his efforts was undeniable, forcing me to view him through a new lens. The man before me was flawed but earnest, trying to right his wrongs before it was too late. As I looked at him, a mixture of sorrow and understanding washed over me, leaving me conflicted yet hopeful. With everything laid bare, I asked point blank what he did after knocking on my door. Patrick took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine for understanding. The room was silent, everyone waiting for his response. The weight of decades lay between us, and I needed to know why he had finally resurfaced. His hesitation was evident, but he finally began to explain, his voice heavy with emotion and regret. Patrick confessed he offered me a parting gift hidden within that old envelope. "It's something of great importance," he started, his voice trembling. My curiosity skyrocketed. I couldn't fathom what he could possibly give me now that would make any difference. He handed over the worn, weathered envelope with trembling hands, urging me to open it. I hesitated, the tension in the room palpable, before reluctantly peeling it open. It was a deed to a cabin by the lake where he and my mother dreamed of living. The paper felt heavy in my hands, like it carried the weight of years gone by, memories neither mine nor his. "This was our dream," he said softly, his eyes filled with tears. The realization that he had held on to this dream for so long was overwhelming. The cabin symbolized more than just a property. It was a fragment of their shared dreams. This was his final effort to create a tangible legacy of their love and his redemption. He wanted this cabin to be a part of our family history, a place where wounds could heal and new memories could grow. Patrick's shaky hands reached out, touching the edge of the deed as if trying to draw strength from it. "I hoped we could build a future here, a place truly ours," he whispered. The emotional magnitude of this gift, coupled with his actions over the past days, left me in tears, a mix of heartbreak and hope. I had always yearned for a tangible connection to my mother, and now, here it was, delivered by the man who had caused so much pain. This cabin symbolized not just their love story, but also a possible path to reconciliation and healing. Making sense of these emotions was difficult. The cabin by the lake symbolizes both his guilt and his desire to make amends, creating a bridge from past wounds to potential healing. It was evident that Patrick was trying to use this symbolic gesture as an olive branch. The significance of the cabin was not lost on me. It was where my parents shared their dreams, and now it could be a place for us to mend what was broken. It was both daunting and encouraging. I visited the cabin by the lake, feeling a profound connection to my parents' past and a hope for future reconciliation. The air felt heavy with memories as I approached the wooden structure. Scanning the serene surroundings, I wondered how different my life might have been if things had worked out differently for my parents. Standing there, I felt a narrowing gap between the past and the future, intertwined with the promise of healing. Patrick and I spent time at the cabin, sharing stories and building new memories. The shared moments lightened the emotional load I carried. We talked about my childhood, my dreams, and even laughed too, together as we pieced together old fragmented memories. "Your mother would have loved this," Patrick said, looking around with a mixture of nostalgia and hope. With each shared laugh, the tension between us eased, forming a fragile bond. With each passing day, I felt more at peace with my past and more open to the future. The trauma and anger that had defined my relationship with Patrick began to dissipate. Spending time at the cabin gave me a sense of closure I never expected. The lake's calm waters mirrored the growing serenity in my heart. I started to see Patrick not just as the man who abandoned me, but as the father who was trying to make things right. By the end of the week, I forgave my father, and we both felt the weight of our shared history lift, ready for a new beginning, This was a pivotal moment, one filled with mutual understanding and acceptance. Tears streamed down my face as I embraced him for the first time in over 2 decades. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and I knew he meant it. The pain of the past was still there, but it was overshadowed by hope for the future.